So, imagine taking the delicate Nihavend Maqam and just trapping it in a -40-degree glacier. The ornaments just freeze.
Yeah, you're left with this naked skeleton of pure frozen sadness.
Right. I mean, that cold Nordic Noir vibe you hear is really just the ghost of Nihavend. The math is the same, but the climate changed. Welcome to our deep dive, by the way. Let's look closer at that.
It's a perfect analogy because structurally, Nihavend is essentially the Western minor scale, but Western instruments kind of smooth out the pitches.
You completely miss those microtones, the comas, right?
Exactly, the coma system. Those subtle slices of tone are what give Nihavend its deep historical melancholy. Strip away that warm Istanbul soul and you're right back in the freezer.
Which leaves you wondering, if the math is universal but the style dictates the emotion, are we listening to the notes or just the culture?
You know, have you ever really stopped to think about how a piece of music can just reach across centuries and cultures and make you feel something so specific? Not just generic happiness or sadness, but a very particular shade of melancholy? Well, today we're going to dive deep into the anatomy of sadness itself, encoded in an ancient musical system, and see how modern science is actually proving what musicians have known all along.
All right, so here's our game plan. We'll start with the whole idea of music and emotion. Then we're going to dissect a specific musical mode called a maqam. After that, we'll see how theorists tried to pin it down, what actually happens in your brain when you listen to it, and finally, what all of this tells us about a universal language of human feeling. Okay, so first things first. Let's set the stage a bit and look at how music builds our emotional world, starting with just simple scales and leading to these really complex feelings.
This is really the central mystery we're chasing, right? It feels like magic, doesn't it? That a specific pattern of vibrations floating through the air can consistently create such a deep internal state in so many different people. But what we're going to find out is that it's less about magic and more about a kind of emotional grammar built into the sound itself.
So most of us are pretty familiar with the Western way of doing things. You've got your major keys for happy stuff, minor keys for sad stuff. It's a pretty simple dichotomy, but that is just one way to organize sound. Turkish classical music uses a system called maqam, and it is way more intricate. We're not just talking happy versus sad, we're talking about a huge palette with dozens of very specific moods and emotions. So let's see how this really works. We're going to get our hands dirty and deconstruct one of the most powerful of these maqams, Nihavend, to really understand it from the inside out. So what in the world is a maqam? Well, think of it less like a simple scale and more like a complete recipe for creating a specific feeling. It's not just a list of notes you're allowed to play. Oh no, it's a whole set of instructions. Which notes to lean on, which direction the melody should go, where to pause. All of it is designed to guide the listener to a very, very particular emotional place. And the one we're putting under the microscope today is Nihavend. For centuries, people have said this maqam just embodies a deep, specific kind of melancholy, a profound sadness. But why? What is it about this particular set of musical rules that just screams sadness? Let's pop the hood and take a look.
And this is where we get right down to the musical DNA. See, maqams are built from these smaller melodic blocks. You've got groups of 4 notes called tetrachords and groups of 5 notes called pentachords. It's kind of like chemistry. You combine different atoms, you get totally new molecules. And it's the specific combination of these little blocks that gives each maqam its unique emotional signature.
So here's the actual formula for Nihavend. It's a 2-part construction. First, you lay down the foundation, a 5-note sequence, a buselek pentachord. Then, you stack its personality right on top. That's the 4-note sequence, a Kurdi tetrachord. This precise combination, like specific Lego bricks snapping together, is what creates the entire sound world of Nihavend and that feeling of melancholy it's so famous for.
Now you can imagine this incredibly rich and nuanced system, which was passed down by ear for generations. Well, it posed a huge challenge for modern musicologists who wanted to break it all down and categorize it with the language of science. Right, so when 20th century theorists tried to squeeze this fluid, intuitive system of maqams into a more rigid Western-style box, well, it was a total clash of worlds. It created this real tension between an art form that was felt and learned and this modern impulse to explain and codify everything in a neat, systematic way.
2 key figures really led this charge. You had Rauf Yekta, who was one of the first. He tried to build a bridge between Turkish and Western music theory, and his big idea was analyzing maqams as combinations of those building blocks, the tetrachords and pentachords. Then there was Hussein Sadruddin Arel. He took a similar approach, but based his system on a different scale. Both were trying to translate one musical language into another. Okay, so we've got the tradition and we've got the theory. But after all that analysis of its structure, does Nihavend actually physically make people feel sad? Let's pivot from the abstract theory to some pretty concrete neurological proof. So to find out, scientists use this amazing tool called an EEG. It's basically a cap covered in sensors that can read the tiny electrical signals that your brain is constantly firing off. By measuring your brain waves while you're listening to music, they can get a direct, objective picture of the emotional state that music is creating, totally bypassing what you think you're feeling. And this is where a key study by Arman Kalinder and Hasan Gurkan Tekman comes into play. They basically had people listen to music from different maqams, including our star, Nihavend, and they watched their brain activity to see if those centuries-old emotional associations would actually show up in the data.
And the results were, well, they were stunning. The EEG data showed that listening to the Nihavend Maqam consistently triggered brain states that scientists described as calm and sad and mellow and spiritual. The ancient artistic tradition was being validated by modern neuroscience. It wasn't just a cultural belief or a musician's interpretation anymore. It was a measurable, neurological fact.
And this brings us to our final, really profound point, connecting all these threads, from ancient art to modern science, into a single story about a universal language of feeling. I mean, think about the path we've just followed together. We started with a cultural tradition that's centuries old, we moved through the intellectual attempts to deconstruct it, and we ended up with hard scientific proof of its effect on the human brain. What the story of Nihavend really shows us is something fundamental. That music isn't just background noise or some kind of cultural decoration. It is a highly structured language. You could even call it a form of emotional engineering that can plug directly into the hardwiring of the human brain to reliably produce a specific state of mind. And that just leaves us with this final thought to chew on. We've just looked at the anatomy of sadness, literally frozen in the structure of a maqam. And it makes you wonder, if we can encode something as complex and as universal as melancholy into a sequence of sounds, what other universal languages of joy, of wonder, of peace are just hiding out there in plain sight, waiting for us to finally learn how to listen?